The Supreme Court has struck down a major portion of the Trump administration's tariffs, reshaping American trade policy and limiting presidential power. The ruling clarifies that while the president has authority in foreign trade, it is not without boundaries. At issue was the use of the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA, which Trump used to justify sweeping tariffs on imports. The court found this exceeded the law's intent, emphasizing that such broad economic measures require congressional approval. This decision delivers immediate relief to businesses and consumers, lowers prices, and reasserts Congress's role in trade. It marks a pivotal moment, ensuring future trade decisions involve more deliberation and oversight. The Trump administration's tariffs became a defining feature of its America First agenda, aiming to reshape the global trade landscape. These tariffs targeted hundreds of billions of dollars in imports, especially from China, in an effort to protect U.S. industries and encourage domestic manufacturing. The administration argued that these measures would revive American jobs, strengthen national security, and reduce the country's reliance on foreign goods. For many supporters, the tariffs symbolized a bold stand against what they saw as unfair trade practices and a long overdue defense of American workers. Unlike previous administrations' targeted trade actions, these tariffs were sweeping and broad, affecting a wide range of products, from consumer electronics and household appliances to industrial raw materials and agricultural inputs. The impact rippled through nearly every sector of the U.S. economy, touching businesses both large and small. To justify these sweeping tariffs, President Trump invoked the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA, claiming that certain foreign trade practices posed a direct threat to U.S. economic security. This was a controversial and unprecedented interpretation of a law originally designed for national emergencies, not for broad trade disputes. Critics from both political parties argued that this approach bypassed Congress's constitutional authority over trade policy and misused a law meant for genuine emergencies. Many legal scholars warned that such a move set a dangerous precedent, blurring the lines between executive and legislative powers. The financial consequences were significant. U.S. importers paid an estimated $165 billion in additional tariffs, with most of these costs ultimately passed on to American consumers and businesses. Prices for everyday goods rose, and many companies struggled to absorb the increased expenses. Other countries, especially China, retaliated with their own tariffs, targeting key American exports like agricultural products. This tit-for-tat escalation sparked a series of trade wars, disrupted global supply chains, and left many U.S. farmers and manufacturers facing uncertainty and financial hardship. The legal and economic fallout from these actions was profound, raising urgent questions about the limits of presidential power and the future of American trade policy. These debates set the stage for a historic intervention by the Supreme Court. Ultimately, the combination of legal controversy, economic disruption, and mounting public debate brought the issue before the nation's highest court, where the legacy of the Trump administration's trade policies would face its most critical test. The legal battle against the tariffs was spearheaded by a broad coalition of American businesses and influential trade groups. These organizations, representing a wide range of industries, came together in an unprecedented show of unity, determined to challenge what they saw as an overreach of executive power. Their opposition was not just about economics. It was about the fundamental rules that govern how the United States makes decisions on trade and taxation. They argued in court that the tariffs amounted to an unconstitutional tax imposed unilaterally by the executive branch without the approval of Congress. This, they claimed, violated the checks and balances at the heart of the American system. The plaintiffs included everyone from local shop owners to massive multinational corporations. They insisted that the administration had misused the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, or IEEPA, applying it far beyond its intended scope. Instead of addressing specific, short-term emergencies, the law was being used to justify sweeping, long-term tariffs that affected the entire economy. Their lawsuits highlighted a crucial constitutional principle: only Congress has the authority to levy taxes. By bypassing Congress, the president's actions, they argued, threatened the separation of powers and set a dangerous precedent for future administrations. In the lower courts, judges largely sided with the business coalition, ruling that the administration's use of IEEPA to impose tariffs was unconstitutional and exceeded the powers granted by law. The case quickly became a landmark test of executive authority, drawing national attention as it made its way to the Supreme Court. The outcome would have far-reaching implications for the balance of power in Washington. At its core, the fight was about more than just tariffs. It was about defending Congress's constitutional role in shaping economic policy and ensuring that no single branch could act alone in matters so vital to the nation's prosperity. Ultimately, the Supreme Court was tasked with drawing a clear line on presidential power in trade, a decision that would shape the future of American governance and the limits of executive authority. At the Supreme Court, arguments centered on IEEPA's scope and the separation of powers. The government argued the president needed broad discretion to protect economic security, interpreting IEEPA's language as intentionally flexible. Opponents countered that Congress intended IEEPA for specific, time-limited emergencies, not as a tool for sweeping trade policy. They pointed to other laws like the Trade Act of 1974 that provide proper procedures for tariffs. Justices from both sides questioned the wisdom of granting such vast power to the executive without explicit congressional approval. The debate was less about the tariff's merits and more about the process and constitutional limits. The court's decision would define the future balance of power in trade policy. In a 7-2 decision, the Supreme Court ruled the Trump administration's use of IEEPA for broad tariffs was an overreach. Chief Justice Roberts wrote that IEEPA does not authorize the president to create a sweeping tariff regime as general economic policy. The court emphasized that Congress has established specific trade laws, and the executive cannot bypass them with emergency powers. The majority, spanning both conservative and liberal justices, saw unchecked presidential power as a constitutional threat. The ruling reaffirms Congress's primary role in trade and taxation. Dissenting justices argued for deference to the president, but the majority's view prevailed. This decision sets a clear precedent, limiting executive authority in international trade. The ruling triggers a massive financial shift. The government must refund much of the $165 billion collected in tariffs. Businesses can file claims for refunds, providing a significant cash boost and easing years of financial strain. Consumers will see gradual relief as import prices drop, helping to ease inflation. The decision forces a recalibration of U.S. trade strategy. Future tariffs must go through established, transparent legal channels. This shift brings predictability and stability, allowing companies to plan investments and rebuild supply chains. The era of sudden, sweeping tariffs by executive order is over. Trade policy will now be more rules-based and subject to legal scrutiny. The Supreme Court's decision restores confidence and clarity to the business environment. This ruling is part of a broader Supreme Court push to check presidential power, not just in trade, but across multiple Trump-era policies. The court is rebalancing the relationship between Congress and the executive, reinforcing constitutional checks and balances. By narrowing what counts as an emergency under IEEPA, the court limits the president's ability to bypass Congress in other areas too. Future administrations must now be more precise and cautious when invoking emergency powers. The decision underscores that even the president is bound by law and the Constitution. It sets a precedent for ongoing cases about executive authority. The message presidential power is significant, but not unlimited. The political fallout is immediate. Proponents of tariffs see the ruling as a blow to protectionism. Many politicians who have long championed tariffs as a way to shield American industries from foreign competition are now left scrambling, voicing their frustration and concern over what they see as a loss of a critical economic tool. The headlines reflect their disappointment, and protests erupt outside the Capitol, with demonstrators demanding continued support for domestic manufacturing. Meanwhile, free trade advocates celebrate a return to rule of law. Economists and business leaders who have argued for open markets and global cooperation see this as a victory for economic stability and predictability. They believe that removing arbitrary tariffs will foster stronger international relationships and boost innovation, as companies can now plan for the future with greater certainty. The decision removes a key tool from protectionist policymakers, forcing them to seek legislative solutions. No longer can the executive branch act unilaterally. Instead, those who wish to impose tariffs must now persuade Congress and build coalitions, making the process more transparent and accountable to the public. Congress now regains control over trade policy, sparking new debates about the nation's economic direction. Lawmakers from both sides of the aisle are preparing for intense discussions, weighing the benefits of protecting American jobs against the risks of trade wars and higher consumer prices. Lawmakers face pressure to balance protecting U.S. industries with promoting global trade. They must listen to the concerns of workers and business owners alike, striving to craft policies that support economic growth while ensuring American companies remain competitive on the world stage. The era of unilateral executive trade action is over. Future policy will require debate and compromise. Every new trade measure will be subject to rigorous scrutiny, negotiation, and public input, making the process more democratic but also more complex. Both political parties must now clarify their trade positions, knowing executive shortcuts are gone. Party leaders are under pressure to articulate clear, consistent policies that reflect the interests of their constituents as voters demand transparency and accountability in how trade decisions are made. The ruling promises a more thoughtful, collaborative approach to trade. With more voices at the table, there is hope for innovative solutions that balance economic growth, job security, and international cooperation. The Supreme Court hasn't ended the trade debate, but it's changed the rules for everyone. From now on, every decision will be shaped by a broader range of perspectives, ensuring that America's trade policy reflects the will of the people and the realities of a global economy. The Supreme Court's decision charts a new course for U.S. trade, shifting power back to Congress and away from unilateral executive action. Future tariffs will require legislative debate, restoring predictability to trade relationships and global markets. Businesses will focus on securing refunds and adjusting supply chains, while consumers benefit from lower prices. The ruling ends years of uncertainty, providing a stable environment for economic growth. Congress now faces the challenge of crafting trade policy that balances protection and openness. The decision opens a national dialogue about America's economic future. The path forward, a trade policy that is both effective and constitutionally sound.